So thank you very much for coming, and I'm very excited to have Tamsin Blanchard chair this session for us. I've just got a few slides to sort of tell you a little bit about the book in case you haven't had a chance to download it. It's a PDF available from our website, which is circulardesign.org.uk. You can use the QR code at the top of this slide here with an iPhone. If you just hold your camera to that code, it'll take you through to our Menti, where we're collecting questions today for the panel. And if you're doing any social media, you can also use the hashtag CCD Research Circles. So, yeah, where do I start? We have been a research centre for the last 3 years, and the idea behind the book was to draw together some essays and interviews from people who've been working and researching at the centre over the last 3 years. We are one of 10 research centres based at University of the Arts London. And prior to being Centre for Circular Design, we were a research centre called Textile Futures Research Centre, and also TED. TED was in Textiles Environment Design. Kind of building on a legacy of work, and really the point of setting up the centre was to dedicate ourselves to focusing on the challenges that lie ahead with the circular economy. It's really exciting to sort of bring this book to fruition and show the range of work that's been going on at the centre. We have a whole range of researchers working in very different ways around the subject of circular design. And the publication has brought together all levels of research, really, I think is the best way to explain it. From the research that myself and Kay and Kate have been doing for many years now. I don't even want to add up the total number of years, but it's probably, yeah, hopefully not 3 figures. But we've been in this space looking at circular design and sustainable design for a really long time, and have actually worked together for a really long time as well. So I kind of feel some of that comes through in the texts that we'll see in a bit. But we have postdoc researchers now in the centre, and they're attached to funded projects, and they'll be talking about their work today. We have our PhD researchers who are pursuing full-time or part-time studies in the areas that they're specifically interested in. We also have associates, so across CCW, Chelsea, Camberwell and Wimbledon, which are 3 colleges, we have something called the Design School with multiple courses and, of course, multiple researchers and course directors and lecturers that are all interested in sustainability as well from their own particular angle. So in the last 3 years, we've been developing conversations across different courses and different expertise areas. And the publication has brought 3 of those essays forward as well. But it was great to be able to include 3 textile design graduates who, from the MA course, whose work looked at circular materials in some way. And we have external research associates as well, who are researchers from other organisations who have contributed to our projects, our research in some way. And we also work with knowledge exchange partners. And in the publication, it was great to get an interview back from Elin Larsson from Philippa Kay, who we spent a couple of years with, working on the Meester Future Fashion project, as well as Jen's essay from the V&A in Dundee, Sewing Books for the Future, which we'll be hearing about. And Cyndi Rhoades, who's on the call today, and the World Circular Textiles Day, which we actually launched, I can't even remember when, was it last week or the week before? Time is flying by very quickly. But the book really represents a real breadth and wealth of activities and partnerships. And I think that in a nutshell, what we've tried to do is look at circular design from the broadest range of angles possible, really, to understand it for its sort of richness. It's not just a sort of act of recycling a product. This is a way of thinking. So as I mentioned, we have senior researchers in the book, and today on the panel we have Kate Goldsworthy, and she'll be talking a little bit about her essay, which was on emergent themes, really looking at where materials and systems thinking is heading. For our project researchers, we have Rosie Hornbuckle on the panel today, and she's going to be talking about her work around translational design research and really developing this area, this very new area, which bridges the expertise of many different people around materials for the circular economy. Our PhD researchers are well represented today. We have Letitia, Catherine and Emmeline on the panel, and they'll all be talking about their own particular angles. So Letitia textile design for disassembly. And Catherine works with mechanical recycling, and her essay is challenging us to think of the opposing factors of chemical versus mechanical recycling. And Emmeline, who works with fallout, which is the sort of waste from the factory production line, and how she's creating design models to reuse this waste stream. So as I said, we work with associate researchers from these three from Camberwell and Chelsea aren't able to join us on the panel today, but their work represents a really important part of the way that we're opening up new questions around circular design and the circular economy. Our MA textile designers, also not on the panel, but in the book, very much represent the next generation, and kind of a challenging through making, I think, really hands-on technical and craft-based approaches to circular materials. And our external associate researchers, they're not on the panel either, although I know some of them are in the audience. Professor Lucy Norris from Weissensee in Berlin, Dr. Marianne Rial from Fab Lab in Barcelona, Dr. Clara Wilting, who's based in and is a fashion consultant, and Phil Hadridge from IDENC in Cambridge. All four of these experts help us and collaborate with us and work with us in a variety of ways. And finally, our knowledge exchange collaborators, and we have Jen Ballie and Cyndi Rhoades joining us today on the panel. And I suppose it's a sort of sign of the times that we've got to a point of our development of the field of circular design research where we can have these kinds of essays and interviews in a book. We've reached a point of fruition, I think, really, a maturity maybe, where the ideas flow between industry and other partners, backwards and forwards between our research questions, our research insights, and the useful way that they get used in the field. So Jen will tell us a little bit more about the wonderful exhibition that's on at the V&A in Dundee at the moment, Sewing Box for the Future. And Cyndi will tell us about how World Circular Textiles Day, the launch went on the 8th of October and what's happening next. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to the wonderful Tamsin Blanchard, who's going to be chairing a Q&A now with our panel.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Becky. What an amazing, rich and fantastic resource this book is. I'm sure it's going to become one of those Bibles that, you know, we refer to for years on end, until the next one, of course. But I just really wanted to say congratulations to you on the Centre for Circular Design's 3rd birthday at UL. But as you, of course, said, you know, this project has been going on for much, much longer, for, you know, over 2 decades for you personally. Maybe getting into 3 decades, but we won't go there with that. So I just thought it'd be interesting to start with a moment to take stock and really to look at how you started all of this, and to look at how far you think things have developed.
Yeah, you mean in terms of a research centre in
Yes.
in a university? Yeah.
Yes.
Gosh, yes. Well, I mean, Kay Politovich started this off many years ago, really understanding that textile design had to be a different discipline. We had to understand the impacts that came about from the decisions that we made, and that had to become part of the creative process, and that the world of academic research was changing, and that design research would emerge as a field, and that practice research, so the actual making of new knowledge through materials, would be really, really important. Because if anything was going to change in the industry, it had to be tangible, made tangible. Of course, there are other ways to change things, and I would never underestimate the power of policy research, of user behavior and behavior change, and all those other things that are needed to push ahead. But what we could do, and only us could do really as textile designers, was make new models, materials, prototypes that people could actually get their hands on. And that's the labor of love. That's the thing that's kept us going, and the thing that I think marks us out to some extent, the fact that we can craft the answers.
And do you think that the centre now marks a different phase in the evolution of this transformation of the material world as we know it? Are we entering into a new phase?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's what's so exciting about this world of materials and the sort of production, manufacturing, processing, reprocessing systems that are rapidly emerging. We've just been in a linear system for so long. We caught sight of the potential of a circular system a number of years ago, but we haven't been able to realize it. Those other parts of the circle were never firmly in place. We weren't in touch with each other. We were all working in silos. And then suddenly overnight, it's all joined up. It's really joining up. I think Kate Goldsworthy and Cyndi later on will be able to talk about this much, much more, but it has changed. There's been a big sea change moment, and I think there's been a big investment from the EU in research to sort of make this happen, as well as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and it's sort of different drivers have really pushed the agenda forward, and we're all talking and working to each other, and we're working with each other. And I think that we really saw that when we launched World Circular Textiles Day, just how many partnerships and organizations and conversations and ventures were already happening. And it's a new era.
Yeah, and it obviously feels like there's a new sense of urgency. I mean, real urgency. Are you having to deal with a sense of panic? Your own panic, your researchers' panic?
Oh,
are you feeling that? Does that?
Try not to think about that too much. Yeah, of course. There is such a sense of urgency, and but it kind of reinforces what we believe and we've been doing, that we need to change, and we need to change quickly. And the question is, how do we best change? And how do we best change? We do it by building something better, by showing a better way, by inspiring, by innovating, by communicating. And they're kind of all the things that they're there in the book. You can see it jumps off the page. So I suppose we spent all this time getting ready to act.
So you're keeping calm, keeping your cool.
Well, if you visited, I don't think you visited our office, and we haven't been there for a long time, of course, but there are lots of teacups and teapots that say, keep calm, freak out later.
Right, yeah. In his foreword to the book, Professor Malcolm Quinn wrote something that I just thought was brilliant, where he talks about how you're positioning design as a critique of ideology, altering the social conditions that make it seem natural for us to make clothes that can't be disassembled for recycling, to burn wool rather than finding a way to use it, or to assume that repairing is not a creative thing to do. Do you think those norms really are finally shifting, or are we still in a bit of a bubble about that?
Oh, we're in a bubble, and we're breaking out of the bubble, I think. You have to be able to identify the problems and express the alternatives, and that's taken a while. Those challenges require extreme system change. So we're not disillusioned. You know, we know this is a difficult, torturous road ahead. But if you're in the creative field, if you're in fashion and textiles, if you wear clothes, you know things have got to change. So how do you change? How do you get change? And I think that we are getting better at working beyond the bubble and, you know, actually having effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you explain a little more about the unique approach of the Centre for Circular Design, and that you have so many different approaches, but you have this, you know, amazing unifying common thread, and you all come at this from your own practice, and rather than it being theory or policy driven, it's very hands-on and very tangible.
Yeah. And right at the bedrock for me is textile design and the tradition of the textile designer and where it comes from, and actually women and feminism and industrial revolution models that were set in place. You know, there's this fundamental thing of like, what is this discipline? Who are these people? We love these materials. We love the act of making. What can we do to change things? You know, there's this passion and this interest and these ideas that connect around the making. And as soon as you're in the moment where you're modeling and you're making and you're crafting and you're showing the prototype and you're talking to each other around a table of materials, change is tangible. The ideas are sort of real, they're made real. And we spend so much time going to conferences and, so many moments that are about talking. The difference with us is that we're doing the making. And then we're sharing those models, we're coming together, we're constantly critiquing each other, constantly collaborating. And I think what's happened is we've actually got to a point where we're pretty good at this. And now we're able to work with scientists and policymakers and social scientists and other experts. And I think they can see the potential, and we're beginning to understand each other, and we're actually beginning to see how we can create joined up actions.
Yeah, and critiquing obviously is a really important way of working and moving forwards. But you also talk about, when working with creative researchers, how you have to appreciate that ideas are precious and creators feel vulnerable. And do you think at this moment, with the pandemic, the climate emergency, and sometimes really quite polarized debates around the edge of sustainability that are making us as a community feel even more vulnerable? Do you feel that you're having to work extra hard to nurture people to be, to be brave in their ideas?
Yeah, of course. And ourselves, me included. And I mean, I'm sat at the bottom of my garden, talking to, on any given day, talking to a couple of hundred people. We're all having very extreme ways of working now, and we have to dig deep to find the right tone. The energy that we normally get from each other by being in the same room, by being on the train together, by being backstage, all of those actions which create the moment that give you the confidence and the insights to share, you have to summon them up on your own from your sitting room. So yes, it's different as a researcher. Yes, it's different as students. I mean, imagine what it's like for creative practitioners and students that are sat at home who've signed up, they're in the middle of a course, or they've signed up to a course and they're getting brilliant tuition online, but they've also got to overcome so much of the things that would normally be dealt with down the pub or in the student bar, boosting each other, sharing tales, all of that. Maybe it's missing, or maybe it happens on Zoom calls, but it is hard. I think it's a really hard moment in time.
Yeah, at a time when obviously we're really having to pull it out of the bag and just go the extra mile as well.
Well, of course, yes. So that there's a heightened sense of urgency. People are understanding this much more. David Attenborough's done a huge amount to accentuate points for us recently, for a broader public recently. And I think we all realise it's time to act. It's sort of now or never. If we can't make the changes now, they're not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's really amazing that you've brought all of these incredible essays and ideas and new ways of thinking together in this book. And I feel like it really has galvanised your community. So we'd love to have a chat with some of the researchers in the book, starting with Kate Goldsworthy, if we may, if you're there, Kate. Just ask me what the most exciting innovation in the circular textile tech space is right now.
Of course. I mean, for me, sort of everything right now hinges around, you know, fibre to fibre recovery. It's not that it's a silver bullet. It's not that it's the only thing that will fix everything. But without it, I don't think we will ever achieve true circularity and therefore true sustainability. So, you know, the kind of work that we'll hear about that's happening within Worn Again from Cyndi later is just so vital to us being able to deal with not all waste streams, but the kind of textile waste that really no one else can handle. And I think, you know, if we can turn that currently that wasted resource into a truly renewable one, which effectively, you know, a perpetual state of recycling would enable, it would be every bit as renewable as one that's grown in an agricultural context. So I think that for me is the sort of the absolute predominant technology that needs to be solved. But I think there are so many other technologies, and I really only touched on a handful in this piece, but you know, that will be the glue that hold the system together once we have that technology. So you know, companies like Oratane who can geographically locate where a fibre has been grown within a few square miles, which totally puts the kind of the power of transparency into perhaps the public's hands, not necessarily just the corporations. Companies like Reverse Resources, who are sort of busy uncovering potential waste streams that we could reuse from places that just aren't counted yet. You know, the sort of industry waste that often gets hidden. And not to mention all the incredible materials companies who are turning waste streams from, you know, our food supply sort of agricultural processes into textiles. You know, there's so much innovation going on right now.
Yeah, and it's a really new space, relatively, isn't it? The idea of textile and technology working together in this way. But I feel like there's so much depending on it. You know, there's so much expected of it, and things are moving so quickly. Do you think there's enough investment supporting that?
Well, I think investment's been difficult, definitely, but I think there is starting to be, you know, a huge amount of investment, most public, you know, both public and private, into these resources because there's a glimmer, I suppose, of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think some of these things need industry to get behind them because just the pace that they can move at is that much faster than sometimes academia. So I think that's, you know, fantastic that industry is getting involved in the way they are. Obviously, they're also creating a lot of the problems, but to me that makes it even better that they're picking up this challenge. But I also think it's the only solution. At the same time, I think the thing we love at CCD is at the same time we really focused on, you know, how does design need to change when chemical recovery is really. We're also looking at how to keep products in circulation, how to employ business models, how to, you know, create sharing economies. They'll all work together, I'm convinced, in the end.
Yeah, and do you think it is possible to get to 100% circular? And what are the big challenges involved in achieving that?
Yeah, I guess that really that was the idea behind you know, the launch of World Circular Textile Day. It was really about trying to put out there the positive vision of the future so that everybody could contribute to, you know, breaking down those barriers and challenges to get there. It feels like, you know, the vision is there, it's right in front of us, but the only way to get there is going to be with some kind of shared vision, keeping people on board who might be, you know, backing other solutions as being the predominant ones for them, and trying to understand where the real synergies are. Because there are so many other challenges right now as well, you know, as Becky was already talking about right from the start. It's really hard to keep your eye on the distant sort of horizons when so many people are struggling sort of week by week. I think communicating complexity with clarity, that's always the challenge that that I think we come across all the time in order to get that kind of shared vision.
How, I mean, talking about shared vision, obviously there are many different players going to have to do their part in achieving circularity. What can designers in particular do to accelerate the shift?
Well, I suppose in a way, I tried to capture this in, you know, really just a couple of pages, but it's shifted so hugely since we started. I mean, when I joined the team with Kay and Becky, it was for a project called Worn Again, and the sort of the subplot of that was rethinking recycled textiles. So we were looking at that point, you know, what does design have to do to enable more recycling, you know, whether that's a reactive deal with a waste stream approach, or whether it's, you know, working out a recovery route and designing for that with recyclability embedded. And I think we're still doing both of those things, and both of those things are really vital. But what has changed, I would say, and grown in the last sort of 5 years, or maybe just slightly longer, has been the transdisciplinary, the collaborative space. So with the bigger projects we've been engaged with, working across social and material sciences, we've had to learn new languages, we've had to use design and our design skills in so many different ways, to try and be the glue to bring things together, or maybe point to where there might be gaps or challenges that other people can respond to. And I think, you know, we're getting so much better at that, and we've got some team members now who are you know, incredible at putting together those kinds of methods, be it, you know, Rosie getting us all round and communicating in the same language with her sort of translational design, or someone like Catherine, who is bringing in a real industry perspective on her PhD research. So I think we're getting better at wearing these different hats and joining them up. But I think, you know, for SMEs, for small companies or individual designers, I think they're already doing huge amounts. And I think, for example, in the BFTT project, which is one of the creative clusters partnerships, we're again working on a big consortium basis, but working hand in hand with small companies who, and that's
particularly focusing on technology and textiles.
Yes, it is, but I think in lots of different ways. So everything from companies wanting to improve the circularity of a very specific product, which is something we're used to doing. We tested that for the first time with Philippa Kay. But I think also working across, you know, sort of more with the sustainable marketplace that we're working on with a company called Segura, which is much more about traceability and, you know, how we can create more visibility across the supply chain. You know, that doesn't feel like a traditional design and technology project at all, but it's totally vital to sort of underpin other projects. So yeah, some good stuff happening there too.
It feels like the beginning of so much important work, and obviously everybody, I will be able to have a chance to read your essay if they haven't already read it after this. But thanks so much, Kate. Super interesting.
Thanks, Tamsin.
Thank you, Kate. So we're going to move on now. Sorry, this is going to move very quickly between each of the researchers, but moving on to Catherine Hall, whose essay is called A New Way to Play, Textile Recycling and the Circular Economy. And Catherine, are you there?
I am. Hi, Tamsin.
Hi, Catherine. Hi. So it's very interesting, your essay talking about the two sides of textile recycling, mechanical and chemical, and how they're often seen as two very separate worlds that don't really diverge. You talk about that there are downsides with both mechanical and chemical recycling. Can you just touch quickly on why neither of these technologies is the perfect solution?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's really interesting how in the sort of modern day, people kind of pit, as you say, them against each other. Mechanical recycling isn't necessarily the answer, as we all know, and we've heard the stories. The technology literally rips the fibres from the cloth, and in doing so the fibres get shorter, and when they get shorter we have lesser quality, lesser hand feel, and therefore when we recycle them and use them in new materials we have to probably blend, and we all have heard about the horrors of blending and how that's very difficult to then recycle again. So that's why mechanical recycling is so difficult. Then from a chemical point of view, chemical recycling is totally brilliant, so I don't want to be seen as demonizing chemical recycling at all. But sometimes, in particularly in the case of cotton, for example, you put cotton into a chemical recycling process, and then out the other side, you get a regenerated cellulose, which is an amazing material that you can use for all sorts of applications, but might not be suitable for the cotton shirt, perhaps, that went into the process. So as a designer, when you're looking at these materials, I've been looking at the chemical process and seeing kind of the pitfalls and some of the problems and thinking, well, how can we solve this problem, that if we're putting cotton in that we're not getting quite the same thing out? What do we do in that situation?
And you're suggesting that these two systems they do both have a place?
Absolutely. So what my essay is looking at how both systems might be able to prop each other up. So we have some really great, obviously, benefits of mechanical recycling, as well as the downsides, and equally on the side of chemical recycling. So the idea would be that if we have materials, and cotton is a brilliant example in this case, that can be mechanically recycled and still have the same properties as that cotton that was going into the process, but needs kind of supporting, rather than using, say, virgin materials, why are we not using the chemically recycled materials that have the strength, that have all of the benefits of being recycled in a way that they don't need to be blended, and combining those two so that the two systems can support each other? I use an analogy of sort of teamwork in my essay, and there's kind of team players, rather than sort of fighting against each other, being able to work together.
Can you give an example of how this works in practice?
Well, at the moment, it's not working in practice because chemical recycling is so early on in sort of the stages. But we actually see people doing some of this kind of blending together with chemical recycled. We look at the H&M cellulose dress, which recently came on the market, and we can see how the cellulosic material has been blended in with other cotton materials, making them fully recyclable. So the idea is that when we're combining these materials and using the chemically recycled materials to prop up our mechanical ones, we want to do it in a way as designers that they can be recycled in the future.
Right, and that is completely recyclable.
as long as it remains cellulosic. We'll hear from Cyndi, and she's got the technology where they're developing the possibility to break apart polyester and cotton. But in this case, what I'm suggesting is that you're taking cotton to mechanically recycle it, add the cellulosic chemically recycled material, and then it would all just be a combination of cotton and cellulose, which could go into a chemical recycling process at the end.
Okay, and you talk about some of the unintended consequences of the solutions that you propose, and you talk about the circular economy rebound effect. Can you tell us a little about what that is?
Absolutely. So the circular economy rebound effect is written up in a paper, if anyone's interested, by Zink and Geer in 2017. And essentially what they're saying is that with recycling, obviously before recycling, we have virgin materials that are being turned into products, and those are being sold across the market. When we have recycling technologies that come along, we're recycling lots of materials. And what we don't want to happen is to recycle new materials that don't replace those virgin materials, rather just adding into the market, creating way more product and way more consumption and causing more of a problem than we had to start with. And so that's what we want to avoid when we're thinking about recycling, whether that's mechanical or chemical, or a combination of the two that I'm proposing. We want to make sure that we can avoid those unintended consequences of trying to do the right thing, but accidentally causing more of a problem. Okay,
great. That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Catherine. Moving on to Letitia Forst, if you're there, Letitia.
I am here.
Which I think it connects quite well actually with Catherine's work in a way, because you're talking about textile design for disassembly, which I guess is a technology that would avoid both chemical or mechanical recycling altogether. And you're talking about temporary material systems for borrowed resources. So if we could just start by explaining exactly what you mean by textile design for disassembly.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for that question. I think just picking up on your point about how my work combines with Catherine's, I think it is really interesting to see how we've been doing our PhDs sort of almost at the same time, and we're both looking at the same problem, which is that blended materials are really hard to recycle, and that is one of the big challenges in the field of circular textiles at the moment. Catherine has one way of exploring it, which is sort of detailed in her work and in her publications. And what I'm trying to suggest with textile design for disassembly is that we can keep on combining different resources, as long as we are very careful to make these material combinations in a way which allow them to be taken apart at the end of their useful life, whether this is for the chemical recycling of one of the specific components, or if it's mechanical recycling, or even potentially for the reuse or the upgrade of the specific materials. So that's something that's been looked at a little bit in modular fashion already. The idea of design for disassembly actually comes from fields that have responded to extended producer responsibility in the way that they've been made to be very careful about the way that they were going to retrieve the quite rare or toxic components within the products that they were making. And the idea behind textile design for disassembly is really that we need to take into account that end of life and consider materials like polyester or cotton in the same way that we consider the gold that's inside the telephones that are now designed so that this can be extracted as a valuable resource. So that's textile design for disassembly.
Okay. And are you seeing, I've come across a few kind of big denim company recently that has started to actually put designing their items of clothing, actually designing them for disassembly. Do you see this as, is it going to be something that's rapidly taken up by industry? And what are the key challenges for industry in doing this?
Yeah, I think it's one of the options available in the palette of sustainable design strategies that are now like being sort of developed for designers. And there are other approaches, such as like monomateriality is also a very valid approach to designing for circularity. Sometimes that isn't realistic, it's not possible, because you need to have combinations of materials. So I do think that there's going to be a lot more variety in terms of these approaches. We're going to see regenerated cellulosic materials. We're going to see sort of polyester monomaterial products, but I think we're still going to need the combination between different resources, and we're going to see a lot more products that are designed for disassembly. And to tack on, like, to sort of your other question that was embedded in there, I think one of the big challenges for industry is also going to be able to like make sense of like all these different elements, and that's one of the key elements behind, well, designing anything for circularity really, is that you really need to be able to identify that product and know what it's made of, and be able to sort of harness it and recover it properly so that it can be recovered and recycled.
In your essay, you talk about the difference between a monstrous hybrid and a beautiful one. I love the language that you use about a monstrous hybrid. Can you just explain a little what exactly a monstrous hybrid is?
Yeah, so a monstrous hybrid is actually a term borrowed from Michael Brangart and William McDonough. And it turns out that they actually borrow the term from a sort of like a political term, which is actually more about urbanism, but they use it specifically in Cradle to Cradle to talk about a product or a material which is made of different resources that individually are completely like recyclable or biodegradable, that sort of like belong to a system, but through human action and the way in which we combine these different resources, we're making something which is essentially just destined to landfill, that can't be recovered, doesn't make economic or even environmental sense if you have to spend a lot of labor or energy to take these things apart. So that's a monstrous hybrid. Essentially, it's this sort of combination that fails to take into account circularity and end of life and recovery, and is really just being extremely blind in the way that we're putting things into the world that don't have their place in any recovery system. And in the essay, I take sort of like, I use a quick Frankenstein monster, a sort of metaphor, and thinking about how, like, as designers, there has been a lot of like monstrous hybrid creation in the way that these things have been put out into the world without any kind of consideration for the way in which they're going to be evolving in the future. So as opposed to that, a beautiful hybrid would be a material or product that takes into account this need for combination. And I think that's a really important thing also, is to really acknowledge the fact that we do need material combinations, whether it's for technical reasons or because it's just such an essential part of creativity and of textile design. It's what makes fashion so beautiful and poetic in some ways also, like these material and color combinations. But then if we are going to do that, then we need to do it in a way that like includes this foresight for how these materials are going to be assimilated in systems in the future.
And just finally, do you envisage an industry that includes disassemblers to unpick the beautiful hybrids as part of the production system in the future?
Yeah, well, I think there's a sort of interesting question behind that one, in the way that, like, when we talk about industrial scale, we also need to be thinking about the scale of industry, and we have a very fixed idea of what industrial scale is now. And I think the future of sort of circular textiles is going to include all sorts of scales of industry, and that's going to be, you know, the big sort of like fashion companies that might have an army of unpickers to sort of like recover the resources, but that also includes like more small scale and local sort of systems in which materials can circulate. So I think, yes, definitely there's going to be a new player in the the circular textile sort of supply chain, but I think we need to be quite open about who that's going to be, and the ideas of efficiency and of yield in the supply chain need to be challenged, I think, at this point.
Okay, great. So much to think about there. Yes, really interesting. Yeah, thanks very much, Letitia. To Dr. Rosie Hornbuckle, if you're there, Rosie. And your essay is called Translational Design Research for Systemic Materials Development, which sounds very technical. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, but it's really about how design researchers translate some of the technologies into their work. Is that correct? Can you just talk us through an example of what you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, yeah, it sounds complicated, but I think you're right. It's quite straightforward in a way, because I think that designers are natural translators. They've always sort of sat in this place between the material, if we're talking about materials, material and the user or the person who's going to hold that material. And it's about that translation between what the material, how it comes to you, and then what the end user needs from it in terms of value, meaning, or use, or in a practical sense. So I think that designers have always had this sort of capability. But as I've kind of like, as we've moved into more complex sort of situations of practice, the need for that translation has changed. And I think when I first started to sort of be interested in this idea, it was really about translating. It started to be about translating complex materials for designers, and the designers were actually ended up being the audience for that translation, if you like. I'm talking about, for example, I spent some time at materials libraries, and it would need someone with a sort of an interest in materials, who had design language, who could explain those materials to, for example, a designer who wanted to specify recycled materials, for example, or specify materials that are not familiar to them naturally. So that's where that's sort of like the next progression on, if you like, from how designers were sort of inherently translational. But more as we've sort of developed the way that we've worked, and we've become to work in more, as the others have described, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder projects. Those translational skills we've been able to, I guess, use them and adapt them to these complex situations. And I think that in particular, those gaps in communication or understanding, they're not necessarily between design and design, science and design. They can be between science and social sciences, or they can be between, science and patients, if I go for one of the other projects that I'm working on, which are not textile. So there are gaps. If you see gaps within the knowledge flow, then as a designer, I think it's instinctive to want to try to address those gaps in understanding and knowledge flow, because ultimately, if the knowledge doesn't flow, we can't get to the point that we're all trying to work towards. So what I've kind of observed in the projects that I've worked on with CCD is that there are different ways that designers kind of can do this. If you wanted a specific example, so in Trash to Cash, we use lots of different ways of doing this. Some of it was to do with using material samples. Some of it was to do with developing specific tools for workshops, or even spreadsheets which enable people to fill in data in different ways. So compiling different types of material information and bringing that together into one place. Or even we developed roles for people to act as translators within the collaboration, to sort of facilitate the conversation or the dialogue between different disciplines. So those are kind of like sort of like a transition, if you like, from the sort of innate designer skill of translation into this new way of working that we've been exploring over the last sort of 5 years.
It's interesting because it is a new way of working, and it's brought with it almost its own new language. And you write in your essay about how amazing the materials libraries presents at the Tate were, and it feels as though that was a very, you need to actually hold these materials, you need to feel them, you need to touch them in order to understand the language that goes around them. Is that what made those those materials libraries so effective for you?
Yeah, I mean, that came at a very formative time in my kind of research. I was studying for my PhD at the time, and I just remember it wasn't even a design space. Actually, it was much more sort of science art kind of interactions. But the curators who worked on those events at the Tate and at the Wellcome Collection, and if anyone knows them, Zoe Laughlin, Mark Miodownik and Martin Corrin, they're totally compelling when they talk about materials. And they I think what they did for me was they took down the walls of preconception about materials for people, and by doing that and by allowing people to experience materials in ways they might not have before, then it opened the doorway, if you like, for people to start to question those materials and to understand them in a different way, which I think, when you're talking about the way that materials behave, the science of them, the properties of them, you need to experience them in ways that you haven't experienced with them before, to sort of shake free the bonds, if you like, of your own, the limitations you're put on yourself by your previous experience. So I think they were just sometimes bonkers but brilliant because of that, and that kind of really does sort of form quite a good basis for how I look at how materials are used, because I think you can think of materials in a very siloed way. So if you're a textile designer, maybe you think about textiles from the point of view of textile design, but actually for circularity to work and for material flows to work, and we need to actually shake free from those bonds a little bit and think about materials in a bit more of an objective way, and in terms of the whole landscape of design and application and technology, not just materials for textiles and materials for product design or whatever it is. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, amazing, thank you. So we need to get out of our silos.
I think so.
We need a bit more bonkers thinking. Brilliant, thanks so much, Rosie. Emmeline Child. Hi, Emmeline. And your essay title, which is What is Fallout Fashion? And it strikes me that fallout is a kind of slightly bonkers whole, state of affairs, really. But can you explain what is fallout?
Yeah, so I think we're used to the idea of waste textiles. We wear an item of clothing, and when we're finished with it, we throw it away or take it to a charity shop. But we don't really consider the pre-consumer waste that is happening along the supply chain, and it happens at each point along the supply chain. And this can be in many different shapes or forms. So it can be small garment pieces, or it can be full products that are getting to the end of the production line but are not suitable to be resold for any reason. And we've seen a lot of that happening recently with COVID, and it's been in the press a lot about this kind of abundance of waste product or abundance of product that is now unsaleable, and what do we do with it? And this effectively is fallout. It's a term that's been assigned to this product because it's very unknown and it's very hidden. I think Kate mentioned earlier about there still being a lot of unknowns in it. So that's why I'm kind of hopefully bringing a spotlight to it as a topic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what scale of is this issue, do you think? And has obviously COVID has there's a huge amount of inventory out there that's just hanging around in warehouses. But you're talking particularly as well about samples that maybe are mistakes or something at the end of the production line that's just that's almost perfect, but it's got an error on it. So it's not even something that would end up going into the warehouse.
No, not at all. So yeah, I mean, we don't really know the full issues of the waste. We know that volumes of production have doubled over the last 15 years.
And with that, we have seen an increasing distance from often the design process through to the manufacturing process. And with that, so has a lot of the understanding. That supply chain has become more and more unwelding and all-encompassing, and understanding of each of those points is sort of diminished as it grows. So historically, we may have utilised some of this product, but because of the way that the system is becoming faster, so we're increasing in speeds of make, it's more cost effective to throw away or incinerate this product, this fallout, rather than do anything with it. So because of that, we really don't know the full scale of the issues, because quite often manufacturers are not wanting to, they don't measure this waste. It's not something that is measurable necessarily in its current form. And that's obviously going to be a big area of research that's going to need to develop as we move forward and become more aware of this as a potential resource as well as an issue within the supply chain.
Yeah, so when you're talking about it as a resource, what are you proposing with that? How does it become a resource?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the thing. I think textile designers, fashion designers are quite ingenious people. We're always looking for opportunities and ways to develop ideas. And I think we as designers are, you know, we shape the world around us, and we have a lot of power in that. And I think we need to start, and there is an awareness now of the effectiveness and the importance of us as designers to go forward and look to make these sorts of changes. So my research and this essay and my wider research really is saying, look, we as designers can inform and educate and create models to show greater understanding to some of these issues, and hopefully to kind of bring more awareness and solutions to those problems as well. So, you know, us as designers, we need to increasingly become aware of the supply chain and some of the fallout issues and some of the, you know, wider issues that we've heard already about today, so that as designers, as we're becoming educated in the areas and we're growing as design practitioners, we're able to hopefully resolve some of these problems and challenges that are faced for the industry. And I think really that, in conjunction with these other methods, are going to be kind of a key way for us to really push forward a circular economy for the future.
Amazing. All right, great. Thanks so much, Emily.
Thank you.
Thanks for explaining that. Yeah, moving on now to Jen Ballie, sorry, Jen, whose essay is about a project that she's working on that Becky talked about earlier, Sewing Box for the Future, that's currently at the Dundee V&A, and it's about upskilling the next generation. Are you there, Jen?
Yes, hello, hi there.
Yeah, hi, Jen. So this really is about, it's about repair, it's about customization, it's about teaching sewing skills that are seemingly really diminishing as a skill set that is taught. What can you just talk us through a little bit about the Sewing Box for the Future project and what you're trying to do with it?
Sure, thank you. Our starting point was to think about what we already have in our existing wardrobe and in the home. So we intentionally selected instructional activities that were low cost, and it was using very accessible items. So everything in the kit can be done by hand. There's no need for expensive equipment. You can have a needle and thread and some inspirational guidance and instructions. And we really hope to position this at an individual level. So what can I do to make a difference? And to really try and inspire people, the visitors coming into the museum, that small individual acts, they can be really powerful collectively. So the instructional cards, they offer practical instructions broken down into simple steps. We did a lot of testing with different user groups and different audiences to try and make them as accessible and interactive as possible, but hopefully fun and engaging. And just thinking about this investment in our awareness about where our clothing comes from and encouraging people to take a bit more responsibility for how we care for our clothing in the best ways we possibly can. So this new mindset about being a custodian of your clothing and ensuring it has the best possible life, and thinking about these skills essentially something that might grow with you in your home, around your family, around your friendships and the relationships that you might have. So it's a very social thing too.
So is it instigating a lot of interesting conversations? I imagine particularly between generations maybe? Are you getting older people who, you know, are much more familiar with the skill sets that you're talking about and actually probably do have a sewing box, as opposed to maybe, you know, their grandchildren who, you know, for whom it's a slightly more alien concept?
Absolutely. I've had really mixed feedback, touching upon some of the points in your question. So we've had feedback. It was designed to be very cross-generational and to essentially facilitate conversations amongst all of these different generations. The feedback that we've had is that for some, maybe older generations, they've grown up and they've got much more advanced knowledge. And the sewing box to them, it doesn't feel novel or new. They're like, this is obvious. This is something that we've grown up with. But for them, the sewing box has provided a space for them to come together and to share a nostalgia around making. And before the pandemic, the exhibitions had to be redesigned in response to the pandemic. Initially, we had a lot of social spaces around the museum where people could just spend time making together and having conversations together. And as people sat around these tables, some individuals had come into the museum in their 70s or 80s, and for them, that had been their first trip out in weeks. And they met their friends for a coffee, and it created a safe space to have those conversations. For younger generations, it's been a bit more novel and new, and they're very much being empowered to play or experiment with new materials. A mother wrote a really nice letter. So at the Easter break, I think they travelled to Scotland and Dundee on a night bus from London, and they visited the museum. And her little boy, who was 6 years old, he had a really lovely time, and he asked to come back. So for their Easter break, they revisited 5 days on the trot. And she'd said at the end of the trip, he'd asked if he could spend his pocket money on an embroidery hoop. It's just exciting about inspiring people and getting people engaged in making again. We have had to completely rethink the exhibition and the participatory design element due to the pandemic. So now designed a little sewing box, so playing on the metaphor of a sewing box, but it's a physical box that's a free takeaway resource for visitors in the museum to take away with them. And it's been a real collective effort from our team, our staff, visitor assistants, and also volunteers coming into the museum to make these kits so we can make as much as we possibly can, just to get them out. We've had lots of lovely feedback that it's really just been a lovely thing. There's been a real resurgence around remaking and making.
That's so great to hear. And is it, just quickly, how long is the exhibition on until?
The exhibition is on until the end of the year, and all of the resources are free, online, downloadable, and we'll do a lot more work in the community to push that out there.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thanks so much, Jen. So yeah, so congratulations on the launch of World Circular Textiles Day, which was the 8th of October, just gone. Why was it necessary to name this as a special day, and how did it go?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, it was quite an occasion and an initiative that we launched with our friends, Circle Economy in the Netherlands and Center for Circular Design, and Worn Again Technologies. The three of us came together to launch it because, I mean, really, I think we recognized that there was a need, first and foremost, to celebrate, you know, to say, actually, being involved in circularity and the mammoth task we have ahead of us, there's a long way to go. It's a long road, and you need to stop and celebrate the small wins along the way, just for a sense of hope, if anything. And then I think one of the other big call outs for it was that, we recognized as well that everyone's talking about circularity. We talk about, well, what is it? Is it product reuse? Is it resale platforms? Is it upcycling? Is it chemical, mechanical recycling? There's, all this discussion about what it is and what we can be doing today, but there's not enough time actually imagining where it is we want to get to. What could it actually look like? Like, what would our industry look like when, at a time when products are kept as products for as long as possible until they're then entered into processes that can break them down and turn them back into raw materials to be recycled again. And just the idea of thinking creatively of where we want to get to, we thought was quite a nice platform to engage people in a process to say, okay, well, what are the stepping stones for getting there? And it just gives us a long-term goal to bring people together, shape, design, and develop how we're going to get there together.
Yeah, you talk about it being a long journey, and I think a lot of people are really concerned that actually 2050 is maybe too distant a target. Is it just not possible to do it in a shorter time frame?
It's fun. Sorry, did you want to finish the question?
Well, and I was just wondering if I guess you talk about stepping stones, and maybe, in your plan by 2030, there will be enough change to be made to say, to mitigate against the greater impacts of the textile industry.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I have to say it's funny because normally I'm really overly ambitious and would say, well, we have to have it by 2030, full circularity. But actually, we've done a calculation on the back of a napkin. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's about numbers. It's about consumption. And if you look at the volumes of raw materials, primarily polyester, cotton, and cellulose, the polyester and cotton being the highest consumed fibers, today or in 2018, there was a total of 86 million tons being produced to be used in our textiles. Now, that number is set to increase by 63% by 2030. That's, what is that, 140 million tons of raw materials? So if you say, okay, 140 million tons needs to come from regenerative recycling processes, like everything we're using is either reused or it's coming out of recycling processes. That's a hell of a lot of regenerative recycling plants to build in that amount of time. I mean, it's a massive transition to go from what we're doing today, which is 99% virgin raw materials, to 100% circular. And that calculation is, kind of crazy and wild shot, but I think it puts it into perspective that there's so much that has to happen. So I think long term, let's give ourselves the time, but equally don't lose that sense of urgency. We have things like in 2030 with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the United Nations Fashion Charter on climate change, that we need to reduce GHG emissions by 1.5% in the industry. That alone, the industry is kind of struggling with, saying, geez, how are we going to do that? It means we need to, cut our energy use in raw material production. We need to do this, that, and the other. So, I mean, I think it's helpful to, yes, be realistic, but also be ambitious. And there's a lot to do.
Yeah, I'm curious about what this will mean, switching the industry from one that uses to one that reuses, what that will mean for the virgin cotton farmers, the textile mills, the viscose manufacturers. How do you see them in relation to all of this? Are they going to be reskilled? How does it all pan out?
Yeah. Well, I think firstly, kind of, I turn it around to say, rather than thinking about, is this going to destroy livelihood? Obviously, we have to consider that, and I'll come to that. But I think it's more about saying, if we could find methods for keeping products and raw materials in continual circulation, why wouldn't we? Right? So if we, and technology from a regenerative recycling perspective is the key on that level. I mean, product recycling is another story. And I think it's not going to happen overnight. We have time. We have time to plan. As I was saying, 2050, if it really does take that long, we can all be part of planning that transition. And I think cotton's a really good example, because we've got the challenge of population increase. By 2050, the numbers are set to shoot to, 9 billion people. Cotton is a good example of, if we can turn cotton into cellulose and make it as a circular material, and we can blend it with polyester, and we can recycle those blends because we have new technologies that can do it, then we can start reducing our dependency on cotton. We can use land to grow food. But equally, I mean, the transition will happen over time, and whether it's cotton farmers move to different agriculture, that's one option. But I also think there's going to be huge opportunities for changing livelihoods for the better. The whole nature of production and collection of end-of-use textiles is going to spark huge opportunities for different types of jobs and new jobs in ways which we can't even imagine today. So I don't think the jobs are going to go away. They're just going to change.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've got so many other questions for you, but I'm really keen to throw it open to our audience.
Okay, well, there's one, let's just say there's one here it's designed for disassembly. So if Letitia's there, maybe she could have a little wax lyrical on this. How do you see the application of colour and pattern in textiles working within a circular design or design for disassembly system? And anyone else that would like to come in and answer as well, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I put my camera on and my microphone on, so I'm a bit cornered with this one now.
Colour and pattern. You've worked with colour and pattern.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting one, and I think, I mean, I feel like the idea behind this question is also like this, what it is to be a designer, and like that's what we do. Also, that's how we're different from material scientists who might be going really deep into the innovation that's needed to achieve circularity, but that might not sort of be expressed in such sort of visible and tactile terms as colour and pattern. So I think it's quite important to keep that identity and not, completely step out of what it is that we are, all sort of trained to do in sort of maybe a more conventional way to what we're doing now, which is essentially making beautiful textiles that people will want to wear and sort of interact with in all sorts of ways. And I think that's one of the big challenges behind designing for circularity is being able to make something that has equal sort of desirability to the problem that we're trying to replace. And I think that's a big one for designers also, is making things that will actually phase out all the problems that we've got in the field at the moment. And then specifically around, I mean, I think Catherine might have something interesting also on colour and how that can be worked sort of in circularity and what some of the challenges might be there. So I'm passing over to Catherine now.
Thanks, Letitia. Yeah, no, colour and pattern are one of the biggest challenges when it comes to recycling of textiles. And as Letitia's pointed out, it is one of the biggest challenges. But actually, some of the research that I've been doing as part of my PhD and some of the workshops that I've been doing with students and researchers and industry across the last 3 years has really demonstrated, as Letitia points out, that we as designers can be creative when it comes to pattern and colour. So with mechanical recycling, we want to be able to keep that colour and be able to recycle it and use the colour going forward into the next yarn or material that is produced. But when it comes to sort of pattern garments, that's where it becomes a little bit tricky and a little bit complicated. But actually, it's not totally impossible to take multicoloured fabric and recycle it. You just have to understand the way that those colours blend together and the impacts of those materials. So it might be that a crazy patterned piece of textiles probably would turn into a sort of browny mush colour and therefore be most appropriate to be turned into something maybe hidden. But we want the kind of purer, maybe more subtle colours that can be blended together and to be recycled that can go into a sort of higher value. So my argument there is, in the circular economy, thinking as designers how we can use materials appropriately is going to be the key to understanding how they best circulate and move around.
Great, thank you. I found my questions now. I've got one here for Cyndi. Just go back to you if we can. So who do you think is responsible for building these regenerative recycling plants? It seems we can't leave it up to local governments, yet finding funding for these infrastructures seems an immense challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not going to be cheap, but equally, I think what's driving it is the market demand. The industry and the brands are calling out. They're all signing up or committing to transitioning to circular supply. And so, you know, they're demanding it from their supply chain. And if the economics are right and processes like ours can deliver virgin equivalent cost competitive raw materials, then the market drives that. And you know, certainly for a plant like ours, while it costs a lot of money to build one, the return on investment is very good, and the market demand is the size of the virgin market. So, you know, I think ultimately, and I always come back to the idea that circular economics, the phrase has the word economics in it, and that's for a reason. It will be driven by the economics. It will be driven by the direction of travel for the industry, which is we need another solution for sourcing raw materials, and we need to cut our impacts of virgin production. And I think it goes towards solving that. Of course, there are multiple other angles to it and things to look at, but yeah, I think it's 100% market driven.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cyndi. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. I've got one here, which is quite a general one, which I think maybe Kate or Becky might answer. Maybe Kate. How do you imagine that, or would like, your research can impact on courses and curricula across UAL, or contribute to wider UAL dialogue and research on sustainability or fashion or any other discipline?
Okay. Well, I could start, but I'm sure Becky has also got lots to say on this. I mean, for us, it's totally embedded in everything we do. I think, you know, many of our team members have been, you know, through the UAL system and sort of, you know, continued into research from there. And we've always really valued our connection with the courses. I think more and more now, that's happening sort of in conjunction with research. So whether it's bringing some of our kind of live research into student projects so that they can not only kind of be involved in the research passively, but also contribute. We've sort of done many projects with that kind of feeling. But also I think, you know, students are really noticeably more and more informed as a baseline every single year. We're kind of, you know, amazed at, I suppose, just the level of understanding and comprehension about the really, you know, ever-changing issues that we're facing, and quite often they bring new discoveries to us. So I think it's totally vital. And actually, just to also mention that, for example, Catherine and Letitia, who are on this call, run brilliant programs that link up. You know, in their role as PhD students, they're also linking the research from the centre into many kind of activities with the students. So it's really kind of self-propelling.
Yeah, I think I'd like to also add to that something a little radical, I think, which is, given that we've got a kind of time issue here, we can't fit enough into the curriculum if the curriculum stays the way it is. If it's still preparing students for a linear textile industry, then the problem we have is that they have so much to learn in terms of how to make a textile in itself. You know, it's quite a sort of connected and intense process. And the problem has always been not that we can't teach this and that we can't be embedding this information and this knowledge. It's that there's just no room in the curriculum to fit it in. So the radical comment from me would be that actually we just need to start growing other courses that do tackle this head on, directly, probably at MA level, because we do need people that have got design skills to start off with, and that does take time to craft. But actually, I want to see some really, you know, radical and challenging courses, and we're beginning to get them, but they're not really addressing textiles yet, and sustainability or circular design. You know, we've got quite good social innovation, design and social innovation courses, narrative environments, and, you know, UAL is amazing for the courses it offers. But I would like to float the idea that we very quickly bring some. They could be completely online even, but we need some courses that's all that they're doing.
That's really interesting, and I guess more cross-discipline collaboration as well.
Absolutely,
along
yeah.
Which actually is, sorry, there's a question here about what's next and how you plan to collaborate in the future amongst yourselves, but also with other organisations. I mean, I feel like, you know, this entire responsibility can't be on your shoulders, but you put yourself out there. How are you going to move this forward?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer that, and then that'll kind of wrap our session up, because we're at 6:30. Well, we have, you know, obviously we have plans, and they are very much about building these ecosystems, these sort of life cycle, right round the life cycle consortia. So we're spending a lot more time as design researchers who are connecting with scientists and finding the common ground and finding the common questions and working together. And I would like to see that sort of expand and accelerate, and you know, bring into these multidisciplinary teams, these inter and transdisciplinary teams, all kinds of stakeholders. And actually, I suppose the final word would go then to Cyndi and our work with World Circular Textiles Day. We've built the platform to do that with that organisation. That's what it's all about. We're going to be road mapping in the most dense way how collaborations need to emerge now quickly, joining up the best research and the best activities towards shared visions. So I might not be making very many textiles at all, in fact, you know, in the next 5 years. I think that's the work that I'm going to be doing, and I think we'll be growing as a research centre and as a group with people that have a whole range of other skills and come from a whole range of other backgrounds and are helping us to sort of find this vision. That's it. I've just come on to say goodbye.
Okay.
Well, I can't really think of a better way to end than just the kind of call to arms that we need to create these shared visions together, whatever background or discipline we have.
Yeah, and obviously work towards next World Recycling Day for next year, and start preparing what we're going to do then.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on the website and on our website, because we're about to announce some workshops and how people can get involved and what the next plan of action is. But yeah,
fantastic.
That's a good place.
And the website is
worldcirculartextilesday.com.
Yeah, perfect.
And our own one, which is circulardesign.org.uk, where you can download the book. So I will wrap up and close this session now by saying thank you so much, Tamsin, for sharing that. Very intense. I mean, I know everybody's work like the back of my hand, and I still found that, you know, really pacey and really intense, and you sort of forget just how much we're doing. The book's been a great opportunity to bring that together. This session's been great to sort of bring everybody together. We don't see each other very often, of course, in the flesh. I haven't seen anybody, in fact. But this has been wonderful, and thank you for joining us, and stay in touch online.
Well done, everyone. Congratulations on the work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tamsin. Thanks, everyone.
See you all.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Happy birthday to Emmeline. Woohoo! 40 today. Oh, 30, sorry, 30, Emily.
Well, actually, I thought because of COVID, I'd stop at 39 so I can celebrate 40 next year.
For sure.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Definitely. We've got some real celebrating to do next year.
Hopefully.
Partying.
Yes.
Oh, congratulations, everybody. I mean, amazing work you've done, and I'm looking forward to going back and really reading the book in depth. There's just so much there, and sharing it far and wide.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking the time to throw yourself in, because it's really, I don't know.
It's very intense. My brain's going to explode, so I might have to go and lie down somewhere.
You and I both.
I'm going for a gin and tonic now, a really stiff one.
Oh, nice. I'll join you.